Hi, our group chose gerrymandering in the redistricting of North Carolina. So for this project, our group sought to analyze four maps of North Carolina and compare the degrees of fairness between each map. We chose two test maps and two real maps. In our layout, we have different methods and sources for creating and finding those maps, and we interpreted our data through the efficiency gaps and compactness scores and then outline a conclusion.
So the first two maps were drawn through the Dave's redistricting app. We drew these and created 14 different districts, and then analyzed them through the statistics and analyze tab within the app.
Okay, so this is the vertical line map. This is the algorithmic map we used, and it was made with Dave's redistricting app. It was basically made with two objectives in mind, and that was to make each district line as straight as possible, and also just match the target populations for each district. And by only adhering to those two objectives, we're essentially removing human bias and just making a randomized map.
So this is the goal drawn map. Um, Two of the main methods used to gerrymander this map, which was the goal to gerrymander the biggest advantage possible for Republicans, was through packing and cracking. We packed city centers, which are mostly Democratic, into two different districts, and then cracked other blue areas on the map. And this ultimately helped us gerrymander biggest possible advantage for Republicans.
Okay, and two results. So the vertical line map, we had a decently large gap in terms of district populations, but it still fit within the acceptable range of 1 to 5%. And the efficiency gap was about 6.09%. And then moving on to district seats and compactness. District seats, surprising, not exactly the best. We lost about 1.01 seats for Democrats, so there was definitely a lean right there. And compactness scores are not the best, as can be expected from a just complete vertical line district.
For the goal drawn map, we were able to create the districts within 0.01 of the average. So this was fairly, definitely very acceptable. And the efficiency gap was 36.91, which is relatively high and expected for a map gerrymandered. Within the district seats themselves, the expected vote share is 7-7. However, based on the map, Democrats would pick up an estimated 4 seats, with Republicans arranging around 9-10. Our Polsby Popper Reox scores relatively not bad scores. The Reox scores much better than the Polsby Popper.
So moving on to the 2022 independent map drawn by independent experts, population is within very close to 0%. And to calculate the efficiency gap, one problem I had was to divide the other voters into Republican and to Democrat votes. And the result for the efficiency gap was very low at 0.009. Moving on to the district seats, 7-7 out of the 14 districts, with 0.25 seats lost Democrat. So it's very even, as expected, with the 50%, close to 50% each of the voting population for Republican and Democrat.
And then here we have the 2024 NC congressional map. Same thing with Zach. Everything in terms of the percentages was incredibly close at 0%. This is precisely correct margins and a more fine control over where to place district lines and gerrymandering that the DRA provided. The efficiency gap is comparatively high at 20.76%. And then as well, based on the map share, Democrats lost this, so this is easily it's a biased map, but you'd have to do a little bit more digging and actually poking around to figure that out. As you can see on the graph here, Republicans losing or Democrats losing almost 3 seats total, and Republicans clearing out at a total of almost 10 seat shares. The compactness scores, excuse me, being surprisingly decent. But again, as I alluded to, the control is intentional and impressive to give that Republican bias.
So within our analysis, the goal drawn was the most gerrymandered. This was through because we maximized the wasted Democratic votes. Highest efficiency gap. We have the second most real compactness and lowest poll-speed popper compactness. However, the 2022 was the least gerrymandered with the lowest efficiency gap. Once again, the expected result was the goal drawn favors Republicans. 2022 aims at the most equal and fair representation.
And then comparing the NC Congressional 2024 towards the goal drawn, the 2020 core congressional map had the second highest efficiency gap, and ultimately Republicans had an advantage due to their higher bias in their favor. Again, seats lost was 2.9 to 2.64, and the end goal was successful in terms of favoring Republicans. However, again, as we stated, it was a bit more meticulous in showing its gerrymandering. It wasn't necessarily so much out there, and as you can see in the graph, it was a pretty sizable difference. And then the gold drawn map was more obviously gerrymandered. When viewing the gold drawn map, fewer districts are separated by one precinct. And the power of other factors in gerrymandering map were evident as displayed within our results.
So comparing the algorithmic map and the 2022 congressional map, the vertical line map that we created showed more bias to Republicans, as seen with the efficiency gap and the seats lost. The vertical map was much less compact, which makes sense with the vertical lines. And overall, this just shows how randomness cannot create a necessarily fair map, and there must be probably some sort of human control or some effort to balance a map and determine it based off voting population and create districts that are fair to both parties.
Okay, so wrapping everything up, I think we came to a lot of really interesting conclusions here. To me, I mean, one thing that stuck out is the difference between that goal drawn versus the NC 2024. We saw how even though, the efficiency gap was so crazy, the seats lost was actually more for the 2024. It was a lot of signs that it wasn't necessarily obviously gerrymandered, like ridiculously gerrymandered, like we saw in the gold drawn. It was designed with purpose. It eliminated a lot of competition. It appeared relatively compact, even visually viewing it, but it still favored Republicans even more than the gold drawn map. And also another interesting thing we found, just going back to that vertical line versus 2022, I think that kind of demonstrates how just a random algorithmic map will not necessarily solve gerrymandering or not necessarily gerrymandering, but just unequal districts, because you need a bit of a human touch there to go in and almost create fairness, which doesn't make sense on the surface, but really that's what we found. And that's really it. Here are the references.